Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
This is Exploring the Bizarre, broadcasting somewhere deep within Area 51. And I hope Tina doesn't mind that I borrowed that. I'm always hearing that on Tina's show, Restricted Airspace. So I always love that. So here we are, deep within Area 51. That sounds kind of sordid, doesn't it? Well, I'm Tim Swartz, and unfortunately, Tim Beckley, who's usually with us here tonight, couldn't be here. So I thought that this would be a great opportunity to bring in one of our previous guests from last year. And so let me introduce everyone to Susan Demeter-St. Clair. Susan, thank you very much for being with us again tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure. We had such a great discussion last time, and I'm so happy to be here tonight. And I just want to send out a lot of good energy and healing vibes and love out to Timothy, and hope he's feeling better soon and can come back, and that I can come back maybe and join you both at a later date.
I know it's always a lot of fun with Tim Beckley on the show. I can't hold a candle to the stuff that Tim can come up with for his show, but we'll carry on and we'll just have a fantastic show tonight.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, now, okay, before we bring in our guest, John DeSouza, I wanted to ask Susan, and this was something I wanted to ask you last year when you were on a show, and I didn't get a chance to ask this, but this concerns the chapter in the book, UFOs Reframing the Debate. And the title of your chapter is Making Mountains Out of Mashed Potatoes. And I just always, I love the name of that chapter, and it makes me think, and I'm just wondering if your inspiration for that chapter was from Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It was one of my favorite films. And I do, within that chapter, explore a little bit the film itself and how it really it highlighted some of the more high strangeness and sort of parapsychological aspects of the UFO phenomena, from telepathy and synchronicity, and how they were sort of like called out to this one location where they eventually had the great big sighting with the mother ship. And so I wanted to use something that was a little tongue-in-cheek and also that called back to the film. So yeah, absolutely. One of the best films ever. It's still one of my favorites. I try to rewatch it at least once a year. I'll revisit the film. It's in my top 10.
It really is. And, you know, and you bring up a good point with that, in the idea that throughout the film, there are a lot of high strangeness incidents, even though Spielberg, it was very much with this film in the extraterrestrial nuts and bolts idea. And it's just I brought this up to several people like years later, and they of course didn't quite get it, but and that's one of the things about the UFO and other kinds of paranormal phenomena, is that you have this at times almost, and I'm going to say down to earth, even though we know it's not really down to earth, but we think that we have a handle on some of this stuff, and then it turns around and presents us these really bizarre incidents that we just can't make heads or tail about.
Oh, for sure. Well, the whole phenomena itself is quite absurd, and I actually really enjoy the high strange cases. I mean, you might want to say the devil is in the details, but if you just focus only on the nuts and bolts, you might miss like all this rich sort of information that's coming in from the witnesses who are telling us all these very strange things that happen, whether it's telepathy or in the case of Close Encounters with the little boy. One of the main protagonists was a mother, and it was her child who first started interacting with the UFOs and the pilots of the UFOs. And there was a lot of poltergeist-like stuff, like strange lights and these electronic disturbances and things that you would see with poltergeist cases. And I think the reason that we saw that is because Spielberg wisely went to actual experts, such as Dr. Hynek, who at the time was like the leading expert, along with Jacques Vallée and a few others. And he went to them and he discussed what exactly was going on. So he had that input to sort of go in with these cases and build a richer film around it. Which I found it to be, because it's not just the nuts and bolts sort of sci-fi. We're getting the more human aspects to it. And people do have these experiences. Sometimes they feel that there's a telepathy, or quite often when I've investigated cases, people will say to me, well, they weren't just randomly looking at the sky and something flew by. Something triggered them, or something made them feel like they should look up or look at that specific time. And then they have these amazing experiences. So I do feel that there is definitely a psychic sort of component along with that sort of nuts and bolts kind of thing that really, it intrigues me, the whole sort of the psychic side of things.
Well, that's a very good point, because I mean, I've talked to a number of people over the years that have said the exact same thing to me. You know, I mean, even to the point where they'll say that they've been in bed asleep, and all of a sudden they'll wake up and they'll have this compulsion to go outside. You know,
yes.
And that's when they'll have their experience. I mean, something that they have never, ever done, you know, in their life. Go outside in their pajamas and stand on the driveway and look up in the sky, and then have this experience. So it's and that really confounds a lot of these people who are just really caught up in the whole nuts and bolts extraterrestrial hypothesis. And it makes me think, Susan, I was reading a blog not too long ago, and fortunately for them, I can't remember the name of it, but they were highly critical of the book UFOs Reframing the Debate. And the point that they made that really kind of got to me was that they hadn't read the book, and they weren't going to read the book. They didn't like the names of the chapters, so they just assumed the worst. And you know, it's just like, oh well, this book offers us nothing, and it's just like, wait, you haven't even read the book yet, and you say you're not going to, yet you're going and criticizing it, and that just always just frosts my ass. I tell you.
Well, of course, because you know you can't. Well, don't judge a book by its cover, right?
Yes, yes.
That the idea of UFOs reframing the debate, it was from our editor Robbie Graham, who sort of wanted to showcase various different points of view. Now, yes, there's a common thread about how the ETH really hasn't brought us any closer. And so they're all pretty much critical of the ETH, but there are some that are very skeptical, more nuts and bolts, all the way to the magical and the imaginal. And so you're getting sort of a very different sort of book in that it's exploring many different ideas. So we would assume that some people, yes, might not like some of the chapters, and some people might, you know, like some of the chapters more. But, you know, it's a shame if someone's just going to pan the book and not give it a chance at all, just based on, you know, it's kind of silly to me. But
well, yeah. It reminds me of the whole debate back in the 50s with Immanuel Velikovsky when he wrote his book. Gosh, what was it? Worlds in Collision, I think is the one. And you know, so many scientists panned the book and criticized it, and the majority of them, admitted that they hadn't read it and they weren't going to read it, but just from the brief synopsis that they heard about, probably word of mouth from other people, they knew he was wrong. It's just like, oh God, that just, it just paints these people in such a bad light. I mean, okay, read the book and then you can criticize it and come up with legitimate points. But to me, it's just not, you don't have a leg to stand on unless you actually read the book and know what you're talking about.
I agree. I agree with you. And it's too bad that there are some people that do, especially scientists, because, I think back to the glory days of science and when you had all these brilliant minds. And that is the idea, is that you're going to be building on knowledge. So maybe some things that you hold as true are not correct. So you're going to go where the data takes you and you're going to explore different ideas. And you're not going to be afraid to maybe entertain some different hypotheses, and that is what we need too with UFOs, and that is why I'm very excited as well to talk to John tonight, because he has a little bit different take on things, and it's always good to explore different ideas with people.
Well, let's bring John into the conversation. I know he's sitting there in the sidelines, just probably chomping at the bit to get on and join the discussion. So let me introduce John DeSouza. John, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Oh, thank you very much, Tim. Thanks, Susan. Thanks so much. It's great to be here with you guys. It's pretty awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, now I really quick, I see that now that you, from your bio, you've investigated and collected experiences on paranormal topics for over 2 decades, and you were also an FBI special agent for over, what was it, 25 years?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you worked counter-terrorism and violent crime cases, and you're also the author of the Extradimensionals, True Tales and Concept of Alien Visitors, the Para-Investigators, 52 True Tales and Concepts of Supernaturally Gift Investigators, and your most recent, Clear Hearers. All right, now you can go on. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Tim. Yes, that's a very, very kind introduction. Thank you very much. It's great to be here with you and Susan. And yes, I have been an FBI agent for over 25 years. And during that time, I worked a lot of global war on terrorism, violent crimes, and so forth. And I also collected what I like to call the real X-Files. Cases that I share with people, and information and things that I share with people in my books, and including my book, The Extradimensionals, which fits very, very well with what you guys were just talking about, in an opposite, antithetical way. Since my book, The Extradimensionals, basically is something that comes to the conclusion that alien visitors are definitely not physical, that they are not from our time and space. They are not from next galaxy over. They are visiting Earth constantly, that they are. And they are constantly coming in and out of the Earth, because the Earth is primarily a way station and secondarily a planet. And it is a gateway. And so it's something that's pretty antithetical to the way that ufology has really thought about alien visitors since Roswell, since the Roswell crash. And that's why it's pretty much, that's why my presentation is called The Unthinkable in ufology, which is that these alien visitors are not at all what we have been believing that they are for the last 50, 60 years.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. Now, have you been interested in this kind of stuff? From the beginning. I mean, since you were a kid, because I find that a lot of people like yourself and Susan, it tends to run in families as well.
Oh, sure. And yes, my first experiences, as I recount at the beginning of my book, The Extradimensionals, is also I had my first experiences when I was around 10 years old. And I was in New York as a child. I was out in New York City where I lived, but I was taken out in New York City to a nice area in Manhattan where we were attending a party, a big rental hall, some kind of wedding reception. And there were a lot of little kids there around my age. as well. And so at one point late at night, it was about 1 a.m. So we were all the kids were sugared up and kind of acting crazy. So we all kind of spilled out into the night and just went out into the streets of Manhattan. Late at night, it was 1 a.m. So everything was abandoned. There was nobody out there, and weren't even very few cars parked out there. And we ended up out in this area. It's called the Projects. Not a good neighborhood to be in. But it was deserted, like I said. But it was a very starry, beautiful night. And the kids were playing tag, Regalivio, playing a lot of games. And at one point, it got very spirited. One of the other kids hit me in the stomach. And I went down on the sidewalk, and one of the kids yelled out, he's hurt. He's really hurt. So they all ran back to the rental hall that we all came from, about half a mile away, and just left.
He's hurt. Run.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. I found out what it was like at that point, being kids. But I was out there laying on my back on the sidewalk, and I was looking up between the two tallest buildings I'd ever seen to that time. And I stood up, and because I saw that in the sky, it was a very starry night, beautiful starry night, very clear. But where I was looking straight up between these two tall buildings was like a black ink cloud. It was just a sort of a roiling cloud, but it was black, like the kind of squid would give off in the water when you try to grab it. And it was just, and I kept looking at this black cloud that was just giving off little tendrils. And then from the bottom come spotlights out of this thing. And then with the spotlights come this, like what you would term an old-fashioned disc UFO came out of the bottom of this black cloud. And it came down right towards me. And I was just looking up at it. I'd never seen anything like that. And I just kept looking up at it and just wondering. And then the spotlight hit me, this bluish green spotlight that I've heard from so many witnesses in the years since. It hit me, and I felt like I was being scanned from top to bottom. And I just stood there. And two girls, teenage girls, appeared on my left. And they were screaming and looking up at the same thing I was looking up at, so I know I wasn't the only one. And they were just hanging on, trying to hug each other and look up at the same time and scream at the same time. And one of them screamed at me, "Little boy, you better run home. The world might be ending." And then they disappeared. I mean, they were gone. And then at that time, it was like she woke me up from a stupor. It was like me and the UFO that I was feeling above, that was right above my head. It's like we both changed our mind at the same moment. I took a step back out of the spotlight, and the thing reversed course and went right back up into that black cloud. And it went back up all the way into the black cloud, and the black cloud disappeared. And just a beautiful starry night was visible after that. And I ran back to that rental hall and took off from there, and just went back to the rental hall and tried to tell my parents what had happened. And they told me I better hold on to that till we're in private. And then at home, I told them what all happened. And my mother was very patient with listening. And then my mother told me the lecture about how paranormal topics cannot be discussed in front of general people. Not a good idea, not a good thing to do. And so that was my first observation experience. But then I had a contact experience I'd say about a week later, or a week or two later, when I was at my home. I was at my dad's home. And as we've seen in many of the cases since then, it's almost like the UFOs collect information on people, witnesses, and decide and then take that information somewhere, and then the decision is made whether to contact them. And that's what I believe happened in my case, because a couple of weeks later, I was sleeping at my family's home, and I was in my bedroom, and suddenly then I had the experience of the entire room. It was late at night. It was probably 3 a.m. And I just was trying to stay awake for some reason. And suddenly the room just changed. The entire, the air, the temperature, the feeling of the room just changed completely, and I became stiff as a board, and I couldn't move. And then I felt what I assumed was the hands of children, looked like the forms and hands of little kids, grabbing my feet and my head and lifting me up, but like I was a half-filled helium balloon. Lift me up from the bed. And what was really weird is wherever they left me in the air, I stayed there. If they just like went to adjust themselves for a moment, they would just leave me a certain place in the air, and I would stay there like a helium balloon, sort of, that was almost filled. And then they started taking me up towards the ceiling, and I saw the ceiling approaching closer, and they were climbing on nothing because there was nothing there. But they were climbing on nothing and just lifting me up towards the ceiling. I saw the ceiling coming closer and closer. I couldn't really move at all. But then I saw the ceiling come right up to my face as they were passing through the ceiling somehow. What I assumed were children were passing, because I couldn't really see them. I could only kind of see silhouettes of them and feel their hands on my head and feet. And then they were passing through, but then my forehead bumped against the ceiling, like just stopped right there. And then they lowered me again, leaving me floating motionless on nothing. And just they checked the spot where my forehead wouldn't go through, as if there was something wrong with that spot on the ceiling. And they just kept checking it and just kept on. And then again, they tried to put me through, and it just got bumped on there, and it wouldn't go through. And every time they bumped me, I was able to move my head a little more and a little more. And my first thought was to move my head back, twist it around to look down at my bed, because one of the thoughts that occurred to me was that I might be dead, and my physical body might still be on my bed. And so I looked back down I twisted my neck enough to look down on the bed. And I was relieved to see there was nothing there, just rumpled sheets. But then I was able to, as they again kept on trying to bump me through the ceiling there, I was able to move my neck, and my parents' bedroom was right next to mine there with the door open. Door was open, and I could see right through it, and I was looking. And then we had to go to break.
Yeah, the break is coming up. You heard the music play.
I heard the music. It threw me.
All right,
I'm riveted.
Yeah, hold that thought though, because we want to continue this story when we come back in a few minutes on Exploring the Bizarre with our guests John DeSouza and Susan Demeter-St. Clair. Stay tuned.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. With me tonight is John DeSouza and Susan Demeter-St. Clair. And I encourage everyone, if you have a question for our guests, to send them our way. We want to hear from you. Call, phone, telepathic communication, carrier pigeon. I don't care. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from your questions. So now on with the show.
Yeah, I'm totally riveted. I really want to keep going with John's experiences from childhood. The idea of the levitation and just being bumped on the ceiling like that. That's, to me, it's very powerful.
That's a new one too. I don't think I've heard that one before.
Yeah, I've heard of the beings, whatever they are, going through sort of walls and ceilings and windows and that sort of thing, and they seem to they're violating the physicality of this world. It sort of reminds me a little bit of my own experiences too, where as a child I had these experiences with these little beings, and I thought they were ghosts. I was sort of pulling from, I guess, my limited knowledge bank as a little kid, and I thought because of what they were doing that they were ghosts and not necessarily aliens. It wasn't until later on that I started considering that maybe they were alien-ish. But this is sort of what John's experiences remind me a little bit of my own, and that just, I sort of got chills when he was describing about the bumping on the ceiling like that, like as if we can do this, but you quite can't, just not yet, you know?
Yeah. So after they had bumped my, as I was telling my abduction contact experience there, I had these beings that I assumed were children because I couldn't see their faces, and they just looked kind of smallish. They felt kind of smallish to me, and so they had been lifting me up towards the ceiling, and I just started bumping against that ceiling. They kept on lowering me like the worst engineers in the world, just trying to repeat the same results and repeating the same actions and expecting different results. And they kept on doing it. But as they were bumping my forehead against that ceiling, I was able to move my neck more and more. And then I was able to eventually twist over to see my parents' bedroom, which was right next to my bedroom. And the door was wide opened. And in there were two very similar beings to the ones that were carrying me. There were two beings over my parents' bed, and they were holding their arms out over the bed as if they were creating some sort of stasis field and keeping my parents asleep, because at least it seemed that way to me, because they both of my parents were twisting and turning. It's almost like they were trying to wake up, but they couldn't. My dad was in a pool of sweat, and it appeared, but they could not wake up. And they were holding their hands over them. And at that point, I was able to look at the one closest to me with his hands out, and the one that was on the ground closest to me. And I looked and I was able to look right into its face. And now I could see these are not children. I could see these were something completely different. The shape of the head and those black sort of almond-shaped eyes. And I locked vision with those eyes on that creature, and then I heard the only words I was going to hear from them, which was, "He's awake." And as soon as I heard those words, it was like a cord was cut, and I just fell. I fell heavy into my bed like a sack of potatoes, and I just fell straight down, like all that distance, and I landed heavy in my bed, and they were gone. The room changed back. And everything, they were completely gone. And I was sitting up, and I was just planning on how to wake up my parents and start shouting about everything that was going to happen. And then suddenly, like I had been hit with a tranquilizer dart, I just fell asleep. I just went out. And I was out for quite a while, because in the morning I could hear all the adults from the home shuffling around, talking about a shared common dream that they all had, of being abducted by small gray creatures that were pulling them on a rope across an alien. And they talked about this, and they discussed it, and they wanted to get their story straight, because there was a really religious household, and they had framed that what happened was a demonic attack upon the home. And they didn't want to hear what I had to say about these were aliens, and they were trying to abduct us. And so that was the situation the next morning, and it was really an amazing experience. And I was glad it ended when it did, in the way that it did.
So that's interesting that the adults perceived it as something religious and demonic, but you already were thinking that this was alien.
Yes.
Yes. Did you go on to have further experiences after that?
No, not like that. No, I never did. They did not come back, and I did not have a continuation of that experience. Whatever they found in me, it was not agreeable to them, I believe. And that was it. And I have investigated other cases with similar, and they're out there. You can find them, of people who were attempted to be abducted, and it didn't quite work out. And sometimes they were injured. there were times when they were injured as well. So even though they were not taken. So those cases have happened out there.
Yes. And did you pursue this with your parents? Like, did they also have experiences in their childhood, or were you able to question more people in your family, or were they too frightened?
No, they were very frightened. They were they were from an extreme religious sect, and they were not the type of people who would discuss this sort of thing, except for my mother. And my mother just told me that these sorts of things have to be respected, and try to protect yourself from these things as much as possible.
Okay.
But again, she was putting that in a religious context.
Well, not my mother. My mother was different. My mother was a very powerful psychic, and so she had different points of view on these sorts of things.
Well, that's what I was going to ask next, because I know that you had said after you had your first UFO encounter that she told you that this is something that you don't discuss except for inside the family, which is that's a progressive attitude.
Yeah,
because
and what she really meant was just with her. That's what she really meant, because my mom had a very special abilities, and she was always, and I write about her in my books quite a bit, because she was always my guide in affairs of the paranormal, always.
Well, and I'm sure Susan will agree with this, but I mean, I know in my research I found that probably a majority of people who have these types of experiences, UFO experiences, also have psychic paranormal experiences. They have family members who have the same kind of psychic paranormal experiences. If you a lot of times, if you see UFOs or see unknown types of creatures, more than likely you're also going to see ghosts.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very perceptive of you, Tim. Yes, because that is absolutely true. As a matter of fact, that's why I had to write my latest book, The Clair Hearers, which is basically a history of my family as I was growing up, and all of our paranormal experiences, and what those experiences really meant and what they signified. So yeah, I'm a big believer in morphogenic sites, which basically is just a reference to what, and I forget who there was a great thinker, philosopher, who really investigated this crossover phenomena, where you have a geographic site, and we'll send out investigators to a place, for instance, in New Jersey, this happened, where there was a site where we sent out investigators where there was enormous UFO sighting activity in one geographic area. And you'll send investigators to that area, but then the people in that area will give interviews on the sightings, on sometimes contacts and observation experiences. But then some of them in the same area will say, "Are you here about the Bigfoot sighting or the crypto creature, the crypto creature sightings?" And investigators say, "No, not at all." Or they'll say, did you know about our grandfather visited us last night as soon as the UFO sighting happened. And our grandfather said something to us about family, and we asked the spirit, we said, "Are you being here? Does this have something to do with the UFO?" And the spirit wouldn't know what they were talking about. Oh. And it's very interesting. Documented case. There's many documented cases like that, which shows that there appears to be crossover in these morphogenic sites that occur, almost like we're dealing with gateways, where different phenomena use the same gateways and yet have nothing in common with each other, except for the fact that they are paranormal in some way.
That might be the common denominator. It's also with people. I find that sometimes when I'll investigate a UFO case, when I'm actually talking to someone and then they feel more comfortable, if it's more in person, then they'll go on to tell me things like, I had this amazing sighting when I was an adult, but, when I was a kid, I grew up in a haunted house, or something like along those lines, or they'll have these UFO experiences and then later go on to have ghost experiences or things. So I think that there is a connection to location, but also within families. It does tend to run, I think, in families where people do have all sorts of different experiences over periods of time, especially if the family members are willing to talk amongst each other. And everything from like near-death experience to ghost experience to UFO experience. I think that there is some fine line thread that connects them all.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
don't know. That's my guess. Anyway.
No, that's absolutely right. That does tend to happen with families and generations of people. But I think it's like if the phenomena sticks to begin with, and that's a weird way of putting it, but yeah, if it sticks to the person to begin with, then it will progress with the following generations of that family. But my experience has been more that that paranormal phenomena occurs and sticks with a building or a home, and will just persist in that particular building or home for no matter who lives there or how long it goes on or who moves in or out of that place. And that's been more my experience, because I did actually grow up in a haunted building when I was a kid. And it was a building that produced a lot of weird things. It produced when I was growing up, the particular building produced 2 different serial killers that never had contact with each other and never knew each other. And yet consecutively, they each did their operations out of that particular building. Yeah. And it was crazy. And a lot of other weird psychic phenomena happened out of that building as well. And it was a great relief to me when about 10 years ago, when the building was finally destroyed. I was very happy about that, but I came to find out it's actually rebuilt recently as a very expensive condominium area. So I'm hoping that everything was destroyed with the last bricks and mortar of the previous structure.
Sure, that sounds absolutely very eerie with the serial killers, and we had a similar situation here in Ontario where there was an area that I lived in growing up, and it also produced 2 serial killers, and there were also very weird things in a hotel that used to exist in this neighborhood, and that was quite haunted at the time, and also UFO sightings and such. And so it sounds like we have a lot of similar sort of experience between you and I, in different areas as well. So, yeah.
Were the 2 serial killers together, or were they separate incidents?
It's interesting because I noticed one of them both of them are convicted in prisons here. So one of them, his name was Paul Bernardo, and he was a serial sex killer. There was another one that was also a serial sex killer who was a colonel within the Canadian military, and they both lived in the same area. Now, I don't think that their crimes are in any way connected, but it's interesting that on the internet, a photo surfaced from I think it was the late 70s or early 80s, where they were both at a party together. Wow. And there's a picture of them together, and neither of them at the time were suspected of anything. But the one definitely, absolutely was just a horror show throughout southern Ontario in the late 80s and early 90s. And thank God they were both caught and put away. But yes, they grew up in an area, or they were living in an area anyway at one point where there was a lot of sort of UFO activities recorded. Wow. There was a fellow in the 70s who had a van. He was his UFO van that he would go out and record these incidences. And there's also this hotel called the Guild Inn, which was very haunted, and its grounds were haunted in that as well. So these people lived, these serial killers lived in that general little vicinity. Wow. So Yeah, very eerie how sometimes you have these areas or neighborhoods sort of that just, they have that strange vibe that produce all sorts of weird stuff, I guess.
Morphogenic sites. That's what they are. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think it takes, though, not a special person, but I mean, you can have people who will live in these houses or live in these areas and not have any kind of experience at all. And then there are people who are susceptible to it. They're like batteries almost. Maybe maybe they add energy to these places that then create this phenomena that will then start centering around them. Because I mean, I've looked into haunted houses where you've had one family who live in the house and just all hell breaks loose all the time, but then the next family that moves in, they'll be like, oh, nothing's happening here. Those people were crazy.
Yeah. That's different levels of protection, I believe it is. I think people have ways of being and conducting their lives so that they are protected, whether you want to say it's by beings of light or angels or what have you, that somehow they have a special sort of protection. I think that's what it is.
Do you think it could be a mindset as well? Like, I mean, I used to occasionally go out on investigations, and we'd have like people that were super skeptical, that really they didn't believe anything, and I would secretly call them black holes because they seem to just suck the paranormal energy away. But I don't think these people can actually have experiences because their mindset is to such a degree that it just is not going to happen, that the whole thing gets shut down for them.
I think that those people, it's always been my experience that those people will still have experiences, but of a different type. They will sometimes get a malaise or I don't know how to describe, a darkness that will attach to them, make them even more depressed than what they really are. And they end up, and they don't realize where it comes from or what it is, because they're expecting to see ghosts or they're not expecting to see ghosts, whatever their cynical viewpoint is. And so, but they do become affected. They do. And they just not in ways that they recognize. That's been my experience for people like that.
Well, plus I think also that even if they do have some kind of unusual experience, they'll find some way to explain it off. It's like, oh, well, they've got a million explanations.
It's Venus.
It's like everybody always talks about Occam's razor, and yet some of these people will jump through such fiery hoops to try to come up with an explanation that the explanation just makes a lot less sense than just like, oh, well, it was a ghost.
Wasn't Occam a monk? Like, I mean, wasn't his like razor really the idea that if you can't explain it, it's God?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I think so. I think Occam was a monk, and that was his default. So it's kind of funny that the skeptics are using that Occam's razor.
Well, this is exactly the reason why wherever I go, I always tell people we need to have investigators in these areas, real, true investigators, whether from law enforcement or wherever. But we need real investigators, because real and true investigators, and I always write about this in any of my books, real investigators do not just follow the data. Great scientists like Boyd Bushman have always told me, real scientists have to always follow the data. Well, what that really means, that's code language, means as soon as the physical data runs out, the materialist paradigm runs out, scientists can't go any further. That's it. They have to stop right there. And true investigators have to follow the clues, no matter where the clues lead. And even if the clues lead into the metaphysical, they still have to go there, because that's what an investigator does. And that's all I am. I'm just an investigator. And I have to follow wherever the clues, the patterns, the modus operandi, the profiles that we're building, wherever they lead, I have to follow. And I can't stop just because the physical material explanation runs out. I can't do that. I don't have that comfort that scientists have. And that's exactly why the scientific worldview is exactly the wrong one that will never get you anywhere. in paranormal, in ufology, in things that go beyond the material. That's just the way it is.
Well, I think one of the reasons is that, and I'm, I always bring this up, and it's always been, like the core foundation of my own research, is to listen to the witness. So many people, investigators, scientists, they come in with their own mindset, and they fail to listen to, the person who's actually had the experience, and listen to what they say. And it's like you said, John, when it comes to that point where it goes beyond what is currently known by science, they won't listen to the witness, because then that's anecdotal evidence. We can't tear it apart in the laboratory. We can't replicate it. It's not real. It's anecdotal evidence.
Exactly. And so anything that can't be repeated in the laboratory then becomes invalid. And that's a formula for never getting anywhere in the paranormal, which is exactly what science has done for the last 60 years in ufology and in the paranormal.
Well, I would say with anecdotal evidence, it is used in courts of law. So, we have to listen to the witnesses, because they're really seemingly the only tangible thing we have at the moment.
Well, not just anecdotal, anything can be evidence in a court of law or in any venue that deals with proof and with cases. So people don't really have an idea of what evidence really is anymore because of television, unfortunately. They think that it has to be done in the CSI manner, and it has to be taken to a laboratory. That's what makes it evidence. And then nothing could be further from the truth. And that's why you need experienced investigators in these areas to really uncover that sort of thing.
Well, and that's what we'll have to bring up in the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre, your career with the FBI, and how possibly that led to your current ideas on all of this. So when we come back after this break, we'll continue our conversation with John DeSouza and my host, Susan St. Clair. So stay tuned. Yeah, Demeter.
Like the goddess.
Like the goddess.
Say it over and over.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, welcome back to the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Tim Beckley, unfortunately, can't be with us tonight, so instead we brought in Susan Demeter-St. Clair. Haha, see, I got it right there. Yes. Yeah, that's right. I like the goddess. I got it right there, Susan. and our guest, John DeSouza. And again, anybody out there who has a question for John or Susan or myself, but no one wants to ask me any questions, please, bring it in. We want to hear from you. So, John, I wanted to bring up, all right, 20 years plus working with the FBI, and I know that a lot of people, when they find out about you, they get all excited. They start thinking about the X-Files and, Mulder and Scully and stuff like that. But, for the most part, it's nothing like that. The FBI generally is not interested in, the paranormal or UFOs or things like that. They've got other stuff that they have to do.
That is true. However, they do have to do whatever's in front of them, whether it's just a material investigation that's normal criminal matter or anything of that sort, or if it segues into the paranormal, they have to take care of it. They have to do it. And I can prove that has happened over and over again, because all you got to do is go to the repository of all the declassified investigations on the net, which is at vault.fbi.gov. Anyone can go to it. It's available. It's all for free. You can download any documents for free, anything that people want. And on there are regular investigations, and then there's another tab that says unexplained phenomena. And it's a huge tab. And if you click on that, you go to other tabs open up. One of them says cattle mutilation investigations. Another one says JFK assassination. Another one says UFOs. And that one, the one that says UFOs, opens up. When you click on that, it opens up into huge groups of documents. We're talking thousands and thousands of documents under various, many investigations. And those are all the UFO investigations that have occurred in the FBI. And if you go to group one, you can, group number one, under the UFOs tab, you will see that the FBI has dealt with many of these types of investigations as best they could anyway. And if you go to group number one of UFOs, then you click on that, you can go to page 22. And if you go to page 22 of group number one of UFO documents, you will see what I call the smoking gun document, which is the most suppressed and ignored document in all of ufology and in all of paranormal. It is a one-page report from an FBI agent who also happened to be a scientist as well. And he writes in this one-page document, which has hardly any strikeouts. It's also called a Memorandum of Importance, written July 8th, 1947. And it says, this FBI agent has an informant. And in it, he says, my informant is supernormal, which is an old-timey word for supernatural or paranormal. And from the context, it appears that his informant is an alien visitor, because that's the only conclusion you can come to based on what he writes in the document, because the document has about 8 conclusions in it that were given to him by this informant. And the first one is that alien visitors are not physical. They are not coming from our time and space. They're not coming from the next galaxy over. They're not coming from the Pleiades or from anywhere in our physical reality. He says they are coming from other, and he uses the word Vedas, which is the old Vedic language.
Right.
Sorry, Lokas. The word is Lokas, which is the old Vedic language for other levels of reality, other dimensions. And so we're talking about wormholes and gateways here. This is what we're talking about. And he says they've changed their vibration, alien visitors, real ones. They change their vibrations to match our physical vibrations for short periods of time. And that's how they appear here. And he says, and then their vibration goes back and they go back to where they came from. Same thing with UFOs. He says UFOs are empty. There's no one inside these UFOs. These UFOs accompany alien visitors to carry out small tasks for them. And he says these alien visitors are coming here, and we should never attack UFOs. He says it would be a catastrophe for our Air Force if we ever do that, because of their incredibly advanced technology. And a few years after this was written, we saw that what happened in 1952 over Washington, D.C., when our Air Force was sent after a UFO invasion over Washington, D.C., over the Washington Monument and some of the most protected airspace in the nation. And we had a UFO invasion right over Washington, D.C. in 1952, and our Air Force was humiliated by these vehicles for 2 weeks, almost 14 days. Day and night this happened over the Washington, D.C. Capitol. And there's a Roberts Commission report about that basically there were hundreds of military and civilian witnesses that saw this, and those planes were. So many of the conclusions in this document have been borne out over the years and have been reinforced, as we've seen the extradimensional hypothesis borne out over many cases.
Well, considering... I'm sorry, Susan, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
Well...
Well, somebody go ahead.
I started saying somebody. Okay, I'll go first, Susan. Then you can. Okay, because I need to bring this up. Okay, this document was written in 1947. That now
Yes.
see that was a pretty advanced concept at that time, considering that. Any consideration from the U.S. Army Air Corps. Well, I mean, they weren't even at that point even thinking about, extraterrestrials or aliens from outer space. They were worried that these things were possibly from the Soviet Union, or possibly even Nazis that had, gotten away and were, like in South America or someplace like that. It wasn't until quite a bit later that the idea of extraterrestrials even came up. So here you have this guy talking about extra-dimensional beings visiting us. That's just, it just blows my mind.
Right, but what was happening at this time, and the reason that he wrote this document was because apparently in 1947, in the run-up to in that winter and going into fall, that there was a wave of UFOs across not just the country, but across the world that was apparently very, very significant. And so the scientific community was asking anybody who has knowledge about this to tell them, what is this? Who are these UFOs? What are they doing? What do they want? And so that's why he wrote this document. But what happened at the same time, right around July of 1947, that buried this document for the next 40 years, that absolutely buried this document? What happened was the Roswell crash and the discovery of the Roswell crash right around the same time, which the Roswell crash, I believe, was a psyop that was done to make us believe the opposite, to make us believe that alien visitors are completely physical, that they're just like us, that they just lock themselves in tin cans, and just like any of us could have a car accident, end up dead by the side of the road, that alien visitors are just like that. They lock themselves in these tin cans that can crash, and a couple of bodies just dead by the side of the road, just like any of us could end up. So that's the reason, because Roswell happened. It basically buried this document and took away any attention from this document for the next 40 years, more or less.
I was going to ask you about that, because when you first started telling us about this, you had used the word suppressed, and I was going to ask you, who do you feel is suppressing this document if it's available online for us to all read?
It is now, yeah. It is now, but many years later, through the process of ordinary declassification of time. So that is how. But no, when I say suppression, what I really mean is just by putting no attention on it. I mean, whenever you point the camera at something, you're taking it away from somewhere else. So just by ignoring it, it's never been brought up. Meanwhile, the something like the Huddle memo, the FBI Huddle memo, which is just basically a memo, is constantly pointed at and publicized all the time. And the Huddle memo was nothing more than the FBI recognizing that Roswell happened, and that that the FBI had to get some investigations out there, so that the Air Force wouldn't take all of the information and glory from that particular investigation. So for instance, what I meant was it was suppressed by simply not having any attention placed upon it when it was something so explosive and so revelatory as far as what it tells us and where it tells us that information is from.
But it would have been available to other investigators at the time. I'm just trying to gauge the mood with the FBI as to these sort of these phenomena, because obviously they have investigated, and I believe that's true of all law enforcement to the best of what they can, because obviously there's no crimes really being committed per se. But I do know that here in Ontario, there was an autobiography done by one of the chiefs of police in Toronto, where it's not about the paranormal, but he does include a small chapter about a case that sort of alludes to potential ghosts and synchronicities of all things that occurred during the investigation that actually led them to an arrest. So I do believe that they do actually follow up on these things, as you said, where the clues sort of lead you. But I'm just wondering, in your time in the FBI, did you find that there were more people that perhaps would be open to these types of phenomena, or is it just based on cases, or was this something that you sort of honed in on during your career, or?
Yes, it would be all of the above, because early in my career in the FBI, I was always a collection point for paranormal cases and for paranormal work. And even paranormal stories of other people in law enforcement. So that was always something that I always found a greater openness to it, but that could be because people would come to me with that sort of thing all the time. So, as a matter of fact, some of my cases in the 90s were apparently used for a show called The X-Files, not by my doing, not by anything I did, but by things that were done by other people. Because we had a major inquiry by bosses in the FBI who wanted to know from the creator of the X-Files, Chris Carter, where he was getting his information, because there had possibly been some case information that had been taken into his episodes at the X-Files. And so he was questioned about that. I was questioned about whether I had given any information on that sort of thing. And I was able to say, no, I had no contact at all. And at that time, basically, Chris Carter and I had the same question, which was, well, if they could tell us the exact episodes they're talking about, then we could go further in finding out what information had gotten out on those. And they weren't willing to say that, so they kind of called it a tie and told Chris Carter he could go on doing his show, The X-Files. And I was unfortunately given a nickname, The X-Files Guy, which was then shortened to the X-Man after that. I was told I was demoted from the G-Man to X-Man.
Oh dear. Well, that would be a promotion, I would think, because that's, like as opposed to there's G-Man, but then X-Man is the X-Men, right? I would say that's a promotion, because you're dealing with all this sort of really interesting, cool stuff. I remember at the time I was a huge fan of the X-Files, and Chris Carter was saying that his inspiration to sort of begin writing was from the old Kolchak series from the 1970s, where there was he wasn't an FBI guy, he was more of a journalist that was chasing vampires and things. But I'm wondering if maybe it's a situation of art imitating life, sort of, that maybe somehow he was pooling from some greater consciousness and getting this information that seemingly seemed like true FBI cases. My view is he had retired FBI agents working as consultants, which a lot of TV shows do. And my own suspicion is that they took some of my stuff that they had been aware of and used it in the show. That's just my own suspicion. Oh, because you were recognizing things that were being done. Yes.
Yeah. It's weird the way the secrecy system works. It's like I can't really talk about my own cases to a certain extent. But it's weird. But you can talk about somebody else's cases if you talk about them like as rumor or as this is what I heard, then it's fine to do. But it's weird. But as an FBI agent, you can't talk so much directly about your own cases unless it's in a very vague sort of way.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd love to know what episodes of the X-Files that got the FBI so interested. Yeah, they will reveal what that is. But you go and you watch these shows, you're like, maybe it's that one. Oh, no, it's this one.
Well, it had to be the first years worth, because this happened during the first year that the X-Files was on the air.
Interesting. And Chris Carter always, he always said that. Oh no, I didn't. We just wrote this up all on our own. But then he said that he was afraid that the FBI was going to take him off the air.
Well, this is why. It's for this reason. This is the story.
But the FBI can't do that.
Well, I don't think they could either. But government people, they suck.
That's a good way to put it. Well, now, okay. I'm interested in the story that you told about the Indigo children. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That's a fascinating case.
In 2001, the FBI had stood up all of these intelligence right after the World Trade Center had been bombed and destroyed in the alleged terrorist acts. We had stood up all these intelligence centers all over these intelligence task forces that were collecting information on anybody who could know who all were involved in the World Trade Center bombing and the attack on the World Trade Center. And so we had all these centers that had FBI agents, police, local police from every department, every kind of police agency. They were all in these places collecting leads and collecting information on anybody calling in. And people were told, see something, say something, call it in, let us know, because we're looking for any possible clues on the what happened at the World Trade Center. So please let us know. And so thousands, probably hundreds of thousands across the country, because we're talking all over the country. These centers had been stood up. And so what we found was that there were dozens and dozens of these calls of people calling in information on little kids. Little kids. Now, why would they call in information on little kids? It was because there were dozens of these cases across the country where little kids had precognitive experiences of what was going to happen on 9/11. And we're talking kids as young as like 5 years old, going all the way up to 12 years old. And so we have, as for example, we had one little boy who did this beautiful finger painting. And if you go on my Facebook, I actually have a trailer on my Facebook of my book, my first book, The Investigators, where I actually, in the trailer, actually put the actual finger painting. And we have a little boy who did this beautiful finger painting in class the day before 9/11. And the teacher came over to him and said, wow, sweetheart, these two tall buildings, very nicely done. These two tall buildings appear to be glowing, and there's angels flying out of these buildings with red wings. Where are these angels flying to? And the little boy says to the teacher, these buildings aren't glowing. These buildings are on fire. And those aren't angels with red wings. He says, those are people who are also on fire, and they're jumping out of the buildings. So a teacher, walks away from a kid like that, just doesn't think about it much more until 9/11 happens. And then she actually calls that in as a possible connection to terrorism of some sort. And we have another little girl who was on a playground who was just playing by herself, not playing with the other little kids. She was sitting on the dirt and tracing designs in the dirt with her finger. And the teacher's aide comes over to her, says, "Are you okay? Are you all right, sweetheart? What's are you?" And the little girl says, "I'm fine. I'm just thinking. That's all." And then the teacher's assistant goes to walk away, and the little girl pulls on her skirt violently, and says to her, "Tomorrow, stay away from tall buildings because tall buildings fall down, and sometimes they fall on people."
Good.
Oh, dear.
Again, the teacher walks away from that little girl, doesn't think about it at all until 9/11 happened the next day. Then she thinks back on the experience and thinks, well, maybe I should let somebody know this little girl said this. So there's another little boy who was on a school bus. He's always the first kid off the school bus every day. Very anxious little boy. But on this day, he's sound asleep. And the last person on the bus, sound asleep. And the bus driver goes back there to wake him up. And little boy's having a nightmare, wakes up screaming about people on fire jumping out of buildings and how horrible it is. And bus driver doesn't think about it and just sends the kid into school, makes sure he's okay. But then when 9/11 happens, bus driver thinks about that experience again, thinks it kind of odd, and figures he should phone it in. So that's what happened. And there were dozens of these experiences that occurred all over the country. And they had to be investigated. They had to be run out. The investigation had to be run out to the end. Big police officers or FBI agents with guns had to go interview these little kids or remind them of these experiences, and then check the backgrounds of the families to see if there was any connection to anyone in terrorism. And they had to be checked out. And in every single one of these cases, it came back no connection to terrorism whatsoever, so that the paranormal explanation, every one of these cases, the paranormal explanation was the only explanation left.
Wow.
I would think it would be so hard to talk to these children, because, children that age, after so long a time, their own fantasies are going to start intruding into these initial, precognition, or, whatever
Sure.
you'd want to call it.
Sure.
And it would be like, those buildings on fire and stuff like that, but it was caused by dragons, or
Right.
or things like that. So, I mean, how difficult would it be to, weed out the chaff, so to speak?
Was very hard. And it's always hard. I mean, some of these kids didn't even remember until they had to be really jogged. Yeah. Very hard.
Well, all right. Well, we'll continue this story and others when we come back from our next break. Here we are, Susan, already at the bottom of the hour. Gosh, time really flies.
No, it does.
All right. Well, we will be right back for more Exploring the Bizarre right here on KCRR Radio.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Well, here we are, Susan. Bottom of the hour, less than a half hour left of the show. So many questions, so little time.
There is. This is just, it's gone by too quickly. You're going to have me back.
Yes.
I think we can manage that.
Yes. So, John, I want to ask you, because we were talking about these children, and it got me to thinking about the ethics and treating witnesses and generally investigating the paranormal. You have a background in law enforcement that you can sort of pull from, and you can go on with your investigations from that background. What advice do you have for the UFO community and people that are out there that may not have that background but want to research and investigate these cases? What advice do you have for them?
Well, for investigators, as far as any types of investigators, whether you're talking ghost hunters or any sorts of people who are UFO hunters or things like that, I always tell them, please just take a look at the free sample on my book, The Para Investigators, which lays down just some basic rules and regs and procedures for how investigations and evidence should be conducted. Just simple things and standards that need to be followed so that people have some idea of what real evidence means, what you really do with witness testimony, informant information, what goes on, what do we really need to look at, and what do we need to consider, because television has ruined this area for us. It has really has. And so that's what I always, but generally for the ufology community, I always, wherever I go, I always tell people, just please protect yourselves. Protect yourselves. If you're an experiencer, be very protective of your information, of who you are, because once you get loaded into one of these databases, those databases can be shared with, you don't know with who, and you don't know where. And so you have to be very protective of your information, of who you are. Don't open up your front door ever to someone dressed all in black, saying they're from some federal agency that you never heard of. No one should be able to get into your home or have contact with you that you don't want. So those are the things I always advise people and tell them to take care of themselves and protect themselves, because you have something people want, especially if you're an experiencer, a person who has gone through this sort of thing and has personal experiences in this area. People want your information. They want to know who you are. They want to identify you, and they want to funnel that information to places that may not be the best places to funnel them. So those are the things I always say.
That's great advice.
Really
I agree with you. beware. And if someone does talk to you, make sure you get credentials and find out exactly who they are before you confide in them.
Exactly. There's a lot of people out there, they pretend that they're with the FBI or the CIA, and they're not. And you always have to get a badge number. My badge number was 10585. That will always be my badge number. And you always get their name and badge number, and then you call the 202 area code where their supposed headquarters is to identify them and to say, is this guy really with your agency? That's very important to do. That's just my PSA.
What was your favorite case?
Whoa, my favorite case.
Yes.
That I was.
Sorry, Tim.
No. That's a great question.
My favorite case. Geez, I'm always asked what is the scariest case or the worst case or the most awful case. But I would say my favorite case that I've actually come across, that I have looked into, and that I have had experience with the people involved, I would say, is the Travis Walton case in 1975, because it keeps developing. There are new developments in that case, and a lot of people may not know that Travis Walton was the very young man in 1975 who was abducted aboard a ship from the forests of the Sitgraves National Park in Arizona, where he was with a logging crew, and he was taken aboard a ship for 5 days. And during that time, his compatriots were accused of his murder. And people in the town there figured that he had been murdered by his friends, who were the rest of the logging crew. And so the FBI got involved and state troopers got involved, and they were getting ready to indict his friends for murder because his body was missing, and there was no explanation for his body being missing. However, he was returned 5 days later, and he came back, and he was dehydrated, and he was kind of out of it, but he was alive. And so the developments have happened since then have been pretty amazing, because what occurred later, and of course, he has passed many polygraphs, and he has maintained absolute truth of everything that happened to him, that he was taken aboard a ship. He was confronted by a trio of Greys that were trying to handle him and take him in a certain direction. He became violent with them. He pushed them, he tossed them around, kind of. Those three Greys left. He then went on a tour, self-guided tour of the ship, which turned out to be a huge Coliseum area. It's like fifth dimensional space, because the ship that he saw from the outside appeared to be about 60 feet in diameter. Yet when he was walking around inside, these huge Coliseum areas opened up, and he was going from one open air chamber to another, and it was enormous space there that he was walking through. And eventually he was confronted by another trio of Nordics that then took him and returned him to the medical facility room, and they were able to put him down on that table and return him back to where he was. And the reason that case keeps developing is a couple of reasons. One of them is that another witness came up in that case. It was a military soldier who was in the forest, who was hunting something in the forest that night. And he emerged from the forest, and he actually saw on his right, he saw a pickup truck peeling out with a bunch of guys screaming in it. And then he looked to his left, and he saw a very thin young white man being pulled up into the bottom of a ship. And that's what he saw. And he said the young man disappeared into the bottom of that ship. And he was floating on nothing. He was being just floated on up. And then he went to his base commander, told him what he saw. And he said, should I come forward? Because they're getting ready to indict those guys for murder. His base commander told him, no, wait and see if they're indicted. Then if they are, then you can come forward and say what you saw.
Oh, nice.
And, yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, that was one development that came forward. And then the other development is that Travis Walton himself, and also my investigative conclusion, came to the same came to the same place, which is that the reason his abduction was so different from any other abduction ever in history, because all the abductions tend to follow the classic Betty and Barney Hill paradigm. But his abduction is so different. And now what we've come to realize is, and the investigative conclusion I came to, is that it wasn't an abduction at all. What happened to him was a rescue operation because this ship was getting ready to take off, and he foolishly ran underneath it. And what happened was the ship did take off, but it gave off a bolt of energy for some reason that went through his body and pretty much killed him. It pretty much struck him down dead. And as the ship took off, somehow they became aware that they had killed someone on the ground accidentally. They returned. They came back and picked him up only for the purposes of reviving him and bringing him back to life and bringing him back to health, because for whatever reason they didn't want to do that. And so today Travis Walton says they basically saved his life. It was a rescue operation. And that's why they were so completely unprepared to do command and control on him when he was on the ship, that he reacted violently and the three Greys went running. And that's the only time that's ever happened in an abduction. And it's because it wasn't an abduction at all. It was a rescue operation where they were trying to repair the harm that they did by mistake. And they were trying to just bring him back to life, which they did. And then they just returned him back to where they got him from. That's why that's like my favorite case, because it turns out it has such a happy ending, that even though it took us a long time to realize what actually happened in that case, and that they basically just saved his life and made him better.
That's an amazing. I like that too. That it's a feel good sort of ending to this story that he had. Where the movie was quite frightening. I remember Fire in the Sky, but this is I'm feeling a little more uplifted hearing it this way. And it also makes me think it's similar to those sort of, maybe he had a partial near-death experience, because some of the abductions do sound a lot like the near-death experiences with the light and going into a sort of a light in a tunnel, and then there's beings there. Yeah. Absolutely. So maybe there's some tie in there too.
Well, what do you think of the concept there, John? I mean, you've been talking about how more than likely UFOs and other types of experiences like that are probably more, rather than extraterrestrials or energy beings, for want of a better word, from other dimensions. That the original three creatures that Travis ran across and fought so vigorously against. And then later he ran across three more, Nordic humanoid looking, that, maybe he was dealing with the same three creatures. They just were able to change their shape.
Yeah, I believe that's exactly what happened. I think they just, the three Greys, what he perceived as three Greys, simply went and changed clothing that was more appropriate for the occasion, because since he was going to fight them, they needed to have a guise that was bigger, stronger, and able to deal with him, which is exactly what the three Nordics did. They even performed movements that were exactly the same as the three Greys were trying to do, and they exhibited other patterns that were very similar to the three Greys. So yeah, I believe that's what it is. I believe that these alien visitors are extra-dimensional, and I believe that they probably change species the same way that we would just change clothing. That's one of the things they do. And that's very difficult for people to get their heads around, because we've always thought of this area a certain way, and we never thought of outside that box. So that's why I always say I present the unthinkable in ufology, because because these are ways in which we haven't thought yet. That's all.
Very interesting.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. And I was just going to say, to me that idea makes a lot of sense, considering how knowledgeable these things are. particularly with the individual witnesses, because I mean, you know, there are a lot of cases where the things that come out of the landed craft, will talk to the witness and even make predictions about what's going to happen to them, in the future, which you wouldn't think that a scientist from another planet would be able to do if they were visiting Earth.
Exactly. Yeah, it's these creatures are not restricted by our time and space. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the great discoveries of abductions, is that it appears they are able to manipulate time very easily, stop it, climb out of it, climb back into it as convenience dictates. So, yeah, these are the ways in which these creatures function, the ways that they move around, are not ways which humans do. Because they're not like humans at all. No matter what Roswell crash tells us happened, they are not like humans. They are many degrees, many orders of degrees above human, and so that's how we need to think of this more like light creatures, like you said before.
And maybe that can change sort of their appearance, depending upon culture, too, and history, because, Jacques Vallée had done his work on the Passport to Magonia, where he showed that a lot of the current cases are similar to the fairies of,
Yes.
centuries ago. And,
Exactly.
and different cultures,
Yes.
they experience them in different ways. So you have many humanoids, many, many different types.
Yeah, and Jacques Vallée said that he would be terribly disappointed if alien visitors were nothing more than a physical phenomena traveling through space, because he believes that they are much, much more than that. And so that's how and he also said this alien visitor phenomena appears to have much more in common with spiritistic phenomena than anything else that we have seen. And that's how it looks to me, too. That's why I wrote the extradimensionals, to really explain how that works and what their agendas are, which is also very important.
Well, hopefully more people get out there and they'll be reading your book and expand their horizons a bit, because I'm one of those people that also think that, the ETH, I mean, maybe it's true. I don't know. I'm not pretending I have any answers really for me personally, but I really think that people need to expand their horizons, because the ETH really hasn't gotten us anywhere in 70 years. So I think that
Absolutely.
Looking at it as ultra-dimensionals or interdimensionals is a different way to look at them, and could give us some better insights, certainly.
Absolutely, because this is an extra-dimensional phenomena, but also, government doesn't have the answer. Government doesn't have it. They have a lot of data. There's all kinds of data, like what they released on December 16th through the Pentagon. They released that video. They gave us a confirmation that video was an actual, authentic UFO and extraterrestrial UFO using extraterrestrial technology. And so they can give us confirmations like that, but they can't give us disclosure because they don't have it. And the truth is that we need to continue disclosure by any means necessary, because we're approaching the time when it's become so important that we continue disclosure to each other as much as possible. And we need to bring these cases out to each other and show them and share them and see what really is going on out there. Because if we depend on these Pentagon videos, we can't do it. We can't depend on just them. And we can take the advantage of what they show. That's good. That's a good thing. But we can't just depend on government to show us what the story is. Because
and they actually released that many years ago. That was on the Above Top Secret website. So it was out there already. It just seems that it's been latched upon now. But I mean, I agree with you. They've been disclosing since 1969 in Project Blue Book, and I don't think, and as you said, the FBI website, that anyone can go there and read these cases. And and some people, there's some people high up in the military have come out and said yes, they believe, and others are indifferent or whatever. And I think you're right. I think it's about us experiencers, to come together and talk and be good with each other, and we disclose.
Yes.
We.
Yes. Absolutely. You are a goddess. That's true.
I try to live up to my namesake.
But John, do you think that this phenomena is influenced by our culture or collective consciousness, whatever? Because I mean, it seems like, as Susan pointed out, that 500 years ago people believed in fairies and aliens, and boom, that's what they saw. Now that's old fashioned. We don't believe in that, but we believe in little gray guys from outer space. 500 years in the future, who knows what we will believe in? Will the phenomena take on a new role?
I think it will, because it's apparent to me that we are being prepared for something. There are people who are high up in the government, I would say, even in the elite powers in control, which is what I refer to, maybe some people refer to as the deep state, the Illuminati, about the people who are these bloodlines that feel they control the world, and who actually do give their marching orders to the nations all the time. And they are the ones who go out there and order the New York Times to completely change their attitude about UFOs, or order CNN to go and change their attitude about UFOs 180 degrees from how they used to be. And it's very funny to watch these CNN reporters with these confused looks on their faces, and these New York Times reporters looking very annoyed, having to appear on these shows saying that UFOs are real for the first time. And they're just wondering what is going on. And it's because the orders have changed. The orders from the top, and I'm talking above the presidents or prime ministers, the orders from the top have changed. And we are being prepared for something. And whatever it is, we need to be able to develop our own discernment. We need to develop our own abilities to examine these phenomena, not by seeing Pentagon videos, but by talking to each other, and by talking to each other about our experiences and seeing what's really happening with these experiences. And we need to do that right now, because the preparation is happening. And they are going to spring something on us, and it's going to be very big. And once it happens, it's too late to prepare. So we need to prepare right now.
All right. Well, we've got about 3 minutes left in the program here, John. So I want to give you a chance to let our audience know where they can find out more about you, the titles of your books, websites, upcoming experiences, things like that.
Oh, well, just go to my Facebook. It's John DeSouza on Facebook, and also check out my Twitter, and also I will be appearing at Contact in the Desert, of course, with Jimmy Church and many others, June 1st to 4th in Indian Wells, California, and also in March I will be appearing at Crash Landed Convention with the great actor John Noble from Fringe, and many others. And let me see. I'll be appearing at the Ufology World Congress in Barcelona, Spain,
fun.
On the 22nd of June. For that weekend, that should be something. Oh, also April. In April, I will be appearing at George Norrie Live, in Scottsdale, Arizona. That will be April 21st, and at the Virginia Piper Theater in Scottsdale, Arizona, along with Travis Walton. Travis Walton will be there as well. That should be really quite an event. And that's it. I always ask people to just check out the free samples on my books on Amazon. My books, the Extradimensionals, the Para-Investigators, and the Clair Hearers as well. Just check them out and see if those resonate with you, because there's some very important things that are coming up very shortly, and we need to prepare each other for these things.
All right. And Susan, where can our audience find out more about you?
You can visit my website at Susan St. Clair, stclair.com. And you can also check me out on Facebook as well. And I love to hear people's stories. I'm very interested in especially high strange cases that involve more than one witness. Those are what I'm focusing on at the moment, particularly because I have a parapsychology background, so I'm interested in cases that involve ESP, telekinesis, things of that nature, psychokinesis, anything that's synchronicity especially, and UFOs.
All right. Well, thank you very much, John, Susan, and good night from Exploring the Bizarre.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.